Hello, it's Stephen here, bringing you another What's Up guide to the night sky, this time for April, and you may have noticed that it's getting much more difficult to stargaze now at this time of year. Certainly where I am, I need to wait till about 10:30 p.m. before I see a decent number of stars, and even then there's still a lot of afterglow from the sun, and I've actually set my planetarium software to 10:30 p.m. here, so just bear that in mind when you're following this guide. If you go out earlier or later, the stars will be in slightly different configurations with respect to the horizon. But I think the first thing to mention here is a goodbye to Orion. So here we see the Orion constellation now by 10:30 setting, sadly, towards the west into the evening glow of the sun, and that will continue as we go into April and early May, and we will eventually lose Orion altogether, along with Taurus, with the red giant star Aldebaran, and the lovely Pleiades open star cluster. So these were distinct companions to us during the winter months, and they are now sadly fading, but they are being replaced by other lovely stars. And in fact, if we go up above Orion, it's worth pointing out that the two head stars in Gemini will be clearly visible even in twilight, so Pollux and Castor, or Romulus and Remus, as the Romans called these two stars, and that is the head stars of the twins Gemini. These are the body of the twins coming down. They are quite a bit harder to see. If you do have decent skies, though, they will be pretty clear. And over to the right, we have Auriga with the very bright star Capella. I think the third brightest star in the northern hemisphere, Capella. But that is still quite visible up above the twilight glow here. So let me now swing round towards the north, and we will have a look at what I call the Swiss Army knife of the night sky, the plough, or the Big Dipper, as the Americans like to call it. And if you're facing north, you're actually going to have to crane your neck all the way up to the zenith to see the plough. And it's kind of going to be upside down, so let me just reorientate myself here. If you were looking to the east, though, you would actually see the plough is kind of on its side. So let's look at it in that configuration. So what am I talking about here? The stars in the bowl and the handle of the plough. And of course, the stars on the rightmost side of the bowl take us to Polaris. There is the North Star with the Little Dipper, Ursa Minor, springing forth from it. And a couple of nice bright stars to point out to you. If you follow the arc of the stars in the handle, follow the arc to Arcturus. So imagine making a sweeping arc in the sky. You will get to the very distinctive red giant star Arcturus, roughly towards the east-southeast. And Arcturus means bear watcher, and Arcturus is the closest dying giant star to our sun. I believe it's about 70 light years away, a premonition of the future that awaits our sun when it eventually becomes a red giant, when its fuel stores are depleted, but that won't be for another 4 billion years or so. So don't hold your breath. If we follow this arc, so remember, follow the arc to Arcturus, and we keep going, we actually get to another very bright spring star, which is the star Spica in the constellation Virgo. Now Virgo itself is a very faint constellation, but Spica does stand out as an incredibly bright star, and quite different to Arcturus. Spica is emanating blue light. It's much hotter. It's also quite a bit further away. This is 250 light years away, and Spica is actually a close pair of binary stars, kicking out thousands of times the energy or illumination of our own sun, and that's why Spica is so visible from that distance. So nice to think about that. I believe the two stars that comprise Spica, which you would never be able to split in a backyard telescope, incidentally, they orbit each other every 4 days. So that's a very, very tight binary system. So there is Virgo, and of course Virgo as a zodiacal constellation, meaning it runs through the ecliptic, and if we follow over to the south, we will see Leo culminating at about 10:30 in the south, and by culmination we mean at its highest point towards the south. If we think back to Christmas, December, January, Orion was in this position back then, but since then Orion has moved over towards the west and it's been replaced by Leo. And of course that procession of the constellations that culminate in the south will continue as we go through the year. And obviously the moon and the planets and the sun all travel through these constellations, and particularly in the south, because we are in the northern hemisphere, that's where we see the sun and the moon. And that's where the import of these zodiacal constellations comes from, incidentally. It's just the fact that the moon and the sun and the planets pass through them. Leo itself, pretty obvious by looking for the head of the lion here, or the backwards question mark. Some people think Leo looks like a sphinx. I think it's definitely one of the easier constellations to see, particularly amongst the zodiacal ones. And the brightest star in Leo is Regulus, which means little king. Now, there's a nice double star I want to point out in the question mark. It's Algeba. Here it is here. If you point a backyard telescope at that star with a moderate to high powered eyepiece, so something like, I don't know, 12 to 8mm eyepiece will be sufficient to split that star, and it's a nice double star to look at, so do have a look for that. There's also a nice triplet of galaxies in the haunches of the lion here. I'm not going to dwell on deep sky objects at the moment though, because at this time it isn't going to be dark enough to favourably view our image. You're going to have to be really dedicated and head out sort of after midnight at this time of year to look for some of these fuzzies. So there we go. That is Leo and Virgo, and let me spin round here and go back to the plough just to get our bearings again. So we've talked about Arcturus, we've talked briefly about Polaris. I want to also talk about the other two stars in the plough, which are the bottom two stars I'm pointing to here in the bowl. If you follow those along and curve down, you get to a very bright star called Vega. And Vega is in the constellation Lyra. Now, in early winter, Vega and Lyra are very prominent. They then kind of fade a little bit as we go into early spring, but now Vega's starting to emerge again. And it's just a lovely little constellation to look at. You won't see an awful lot of it. You'll need to wait much later for that, for it to rise a little bit in altitude. However, there is a nice double star to the left of Vega I wanted to point out. It's called the double double, in fact. Now in binoculars you'll see this as a double star, but if you train a backyard telescope in these two stars, you will actually find out that they themselves are double stars. Let's see if I can split one of them. There we go. Do you see that? There is one of the pairs revealing themselves. If I zoom back out, I see it as just a double star. And then all the way up, naked eye, it's a single star. So isn't that lovely? Nice illustration of the different powers that you can bring to bear for observing, from naked eye to binoculars to telescope, to split those four stars. Now, I want to talk about one really nice deep sky object that is pretty visible. It's getting more visible as we go into late April, and that is the Hercules globular cluster. Now, to find this object, find Vega and Arcturus, and we sort of go in between these two stars, and there is a constellation here called Hercules. Now, as grand as Hercules was himself, His constellation is not particularly bright, unfortunately. I always struggle to see it, and often forget about it. It's one of these constellations you need to remember to look for. But there are 4 stars that make up the centre of Hercules called the keystone, and I'm pointing them out here with my mouse. And between the rightmost 2 of these is a lovely globular cluster. Now I'm starting to zoom in on it here, you'll see it here. In binoculars you might notice a very diffuse looking star here. You probably won't see much more detail, but if you bring a telescope to bear on it, you might, under really favourable conditions, see something like this. Now obviously there won't be a crosshair there, but this is the Hercules globular cluster, a sphere of thousands of stars closely packed together, and it's a wonderful object to look at. The better your telescope, the more you will resolve in that dense cluster. These slightly odd spherical clusters actually orbit around the disk of the Milky Way. There's quite a few hundred of them distributed around our galaxy, and it actually allowed us to pinpoint our location in our own galaxy, just measuring the distances to these by various methods. But it's just a lovely thing to look at. These are all fairly small stars actually. Most globulars contain stars that are lacking in metals, so possibly they won't have as many planets around them, and much smaller and less bright, but far older. These stars are very old, and that's one reason why they're smaller. Smaller, low power stars tend to survive longer, and if you look up globular clusters, they're just fascinating things to look at. And the Hercules one is a really nice one, either to observe or indeed image if you're an astrophotographer. Have a go at imaging Hercules. You can get some really lovely images of it. So there we go, that is Hercules. Now, I'm going to scan around to see if there's anything else we can talk about. I think that's probably it for stars. I don't want to go on for too much longer. I should mention though the Milky Way at the moment. Now, during winter the Milky Way kind of arcs directly overhead, and this time of year it's kind of low on the horizon. It kind of makes a small arc from the southwest to the northeast at the moment, and you do have to wait up quite a bit later to see it, but it's still worthwhile. If the moon is not around, go out in the wee hours of the morning or late at night and look out for the Milky Way. And some brighter patches are appearing to the northeast, so it's worth having a look out for. Anyway, I think that's it. I could have talked about a lot more, but I want to keep these videos, fairly digestible for you. I'm hoping to get some more live streams soon. I'm going to hopefully look at the sun in more detail. If I get some nice sunny days, look out for that. There's more sunspots appearing. And otherwise, I will catch up with you later and have a great month of April. Thank you very much for listening.